What do you think wealth is? If the first answer that appears in your mind is money, then maybe you were taught that a long time ago. And I don't blame you, because that's what most people believe. We grow up seeing people who are called rich, and the only thing they have in common is that they have more money. So naturally, we conclude that if I have more money, I'll be okay. I used to believe that too. I used to think that as long as I earned more, I would have more choices. I would be freer. I would feel more secure. It sounds reasonable. Until I started meeting people who had achieved that. They had money, a lot of money, but they didn't have peace. They were always busy, always being pulled by work, by responsibilities, by the things they had created. They could buy anything, but they couldn't buy the feeling that their life belonged to them. And that's when I started to question, if money is the answer, then why are people who have a lot of money still searching for something that money cannot bring? I started to realize maybe the problem isn't that we don't have enough, but that we're chasing the wrong thing from the beginning. And the most dangerous thing is not that you fail, but that you succeed in the wrong direction. You can work harder, you can earn more, you can achieve more things. But if your definition of wealth is wrong, then all of that just takes you farther away from the life you actually want. In this video, I won't tell you how to make more money. I want to go with you and look back at the entire way you understand wealth. Because when you change how you define it, you will start to change how you live. And if you're ready, we'll start with something very simple, but also the biggest mistake most people make. You're not the only one who believes that wealth is money. In fact, it's the most common belief I've ever seen. We grow up in a world where everything is measured by numbers. Monthly income, net worth, account balance. And gradually we begin to see our lives that way. You work to make money, you strive to make more money. You compare based on who has more. No one really stops and asks, is this the right definition? Because if everyone believes it, then it must be right? I used to think that too. I used to believe that if I could make more money, my life would become simpler. Less worry, less pressure, fewer problems. I thought money would solve everything. And to some extent, that's not entirely wrong. Money can solve some problems. It can open some doors. It can give you choices you didn't have before. But the problem is, we've gone beyond that. We don't just see money as a tool, we start seeing it as the goal. And when money becomes the goal, everything begins to change. You no longer ask, does this have meaning? You start asking, does this make money? You no longer ask, does this fit the life I want? You start asking, does this help me move faster? And gradually, your life begins to revolve around one thing, money. But there's something very few people realize. When you put money at the center, you start losing the ability to see other things. You stop paying attention to your time. You stop paying attention to your emotions. You stop paying attention to whether you are truly living aligned with what you want or not. I've met people, they work 10, 12, even 14 hours a day. Not because they love that work, but because they believe that's how they get closer to wealth. But when I ask them a simple question, if you keep living like this, 5 years from now, what will your life look like? They don't have a clear answer. They just say, I'll have more money. But when I ask further, and what will you do with that money? They go silent. You see, that's not a plan. That's just a reaction programmed a long time ago that they've never really examined. And that's where the mistake begins. Not in the action, but in the belief behind that action. If you believe money is everything, you will sacrifice everything to get it. You will sacrifice your time. You will sacrifice your health. You will sacrifice your most important relationships. And you will think that's the price of success. But what you don't realize is you're not just paying a price, you're making a trade. And sometimes the things you trade away are things money cannot buy back. I once met a man, he was very successful financially. He had everything society calls rich. But when we talked, he told me something I will never forget. I spent my whole life building my career, but I don't know what to do with my life. It sounds paradoxical, but it happens more often than you think. Because when you spend too much time chasing money, you can forget why you started. You can forget what truly matters. You can forget. Life is not just about making money, and that's when you start to feel a void that money cannot fill. You can try to earn more, but that feeling is still there. You can buy more things, but that feeling doesn't go away. Because the problem was never how much you have. The problem is what you are pursuing. And if what you're pursuing isn't actually what you need, then even if you achieve it, you will still feel lacking. That's why There are people who achieve every goal they set, but still don't feel satisfied. Not because they aren't good enough, but because their goals were never the real goals. And that brings us to a hard truth. Maybe many of the things you are doing every day are not leading you to the life you truly want. They only lead you to a version that you think you should have, a version defined by others, by society, by what you were taught, but not by you. And when you live by a definition that isn't yours, you will always feel like something is off. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you achieve, there's always a feeling that you're drifting away from something, and that feeling is not the problem. It's a signal that it's time to look again, not at how you work, not at how you make money, but at how you define wealth. Because if that definition is wrong, then everything you build after that will never give you what you're truly looking for. And when you start to see that, a very small shift begins to happen. You start asking questions, not the familiar questions like, how do I make more? But harder questions. Why do I want this? Does this really matter? Or am I just doing what I think is right? And when those questions appear, something else begins to happen. You start to doubt. Not doubting your ability, but doubting the path you're on. And that is the first step of change. Because you cannot change something if you still believe it's right. But when you begin to doubt, when you start to see the cracks in your old belief, you open up a new possibility. A possibility you didn't see before. That maybe there is another way to live, a way where you don't have to trade everything to get money, a way where money is not the center, but just a part. And when that thought begins to form, you no longer see the world the same way. You start observing more. You start questioning more. You start seeing things that you used to overlook. And that's when everything truly begins to change. Not on the outside, but on the inside. But that change doesn't happen instantly. It begins with a very simple feeling that something is no longer right. And when you are in that state, you cannot go back to how it was. You cannot keep believing blindly. You cannot keep running without knowing where you're going. You are forced to stop. And when you stop, you begin to see more clearly about what you're doing, more clearly about what you're pursuing, and most importantly, more clearly about what you truly want. And that very moment is where everything starts to shift. Not with a big decision, but with a new awareness. An awareness that maybe wealth is not what you think. And when that thought appears, another question will naturally follow. If money is not the answer, then why are so many people still chasing it? When you begin to doubt, you start seeing the world in a different way. Not everything changes immediately, but the way you see begins to change. And that is enough for you to notice things you never saw before. You begin to notice that there are people who work a lot, but don't really move forward. They are busy. They are hardworking. They are always doing something. But if you look closer, their lives don't change much. Year after year, they stay in the same place, just a little more tired. And then you also start to notice there are other people. They don't seem as busy. They don't work more hours, but their lives change. They have more time. They have more choices. They seem to have more control over their lives. And that's when a question begins to form. What is actually creating the difference? Not effort, not the number of hours worked. So what is it? I've asked myself that question many times, and the answer didn't come immediately. It came from observing, from listening, from looking at how other people think and act, and gradually I started to see a pattern. There are people who don't work just to earn money. They are building something, a system, a structure, a way for value to be created even when they are not directly there. Meanwhile, there are others who are trading their time for money. And there's nothing wrong with that at a certain stage. But if that's all you do, then you will always be limited because your time is limited. You only have 24 hours a day. And if your income depends entirely on that time, then you are limited as well. And that's when you start to see a very big contradiction. We are taught that. Work harder and you will earn more. But reality shows there are people who work very hard but never truly break out. Meanwhile, there are people who work fewer hours but go further. So the problem is not how much you do. The problem is how you do it. I remember someone once told me, I just need a little more, just a little more income. Everything will be okay. But a little more never ends. Because when you earn more, you also start spending more. You upgrade your lifestyle. You take on more responsibilities. You have more things to maintain. And then you need even more to sustain all of that. It's a loop that many people are stuck in without realizing it. They think they are moving forward, but in reality, they are running in circles. And what makes this loop dangerous is that it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like progress. You earn more. You have more. You live better, at least on the surface. But deep inside, you still feel like something is missing, something you can't quite name. And you think, maybe you just need a little more. But no, maybe you don't need more. Maybe you need to understand differently. I began to realize that money does not solve the root problem. It only amplifies what is already there. If you have clarity, money will help you expand it. If you have chaos, money will make it bigger. If you know where you're going, money will help you move faster. But if you don't, money will only take you further off track. And that's why there are people who, when they have more money, their lives don't become simpler. They become more complicated. More choices, but less clarity. More opportunities, but less direction. And then they start to feel like they are losing control. Not because they lack ability, but because they never built an inner foundation. You see, we often think that as long as I have money, I'll figure everything out later. But the truth is, if you can't manage a little, you won't be able to manage more. If you can't control yourself when you have little, you won't be able to control yourself when you have more. And that's when you begin to question more deeply. Not just questioning the definition wealth equals money, but questioning the way you've been living until now. You start to look back at your choices, your decisions, the things you once thought were right, and you realize many of them were never truly examined by you. They were just accepted. You did it because everyone else did. You believed it because everyone said so. But now you begin to ask, is this actually true for me? And once you start asking that question, you cannot go back to how things were, because you've seen the contradiction. You've seen that there is a huge gap between what we are taught and what actually happens. You've seen that there are people who have everything you once thought was wealth, but they don't have the life you want. And that is a very important moment, because when you realize that the old model doesn't work, you open up the possibility that there is another model, another way of understanding, another way of living. But to step into that, you have to do something that isn't easy. You have to be willing to let go of the old definition. Not just change it a little, but change it from the root. And that always comes with a feeling of discomfort. Because when you no longer hold on to the old, you temporarily have nothing to hold on to. You are in between, no longer fully believing the old, but not yet fully understanding the new. And that's where many people turn back. They go back to what is familiar, not because it's right, but because it's safe. But if you are patient enough, if you keep going deeper, you will reach a point where everything becomes clear. Not clear because someone told you, but clear because you see it yourself. And when you see not just a part, but the whole picture, a truth will appear. A truth that might surprise you. Not because it is complex, but because it is so simple, yet has been overlooked for so long. That maybe wealth was never the thing you were chasing. It is the result of something else, something deeper, something that if you don't understand, you will keep running and never arrive. There is a moment when everything you once believed begins to fall apart. Not because someone tells you you're wrong, but because you can no longer believe the same way. You've seen too many contradictions. You've seen people with money but without the life you want. You've seen paths you once thought were right, not leading to where you were truly searching. And then you are forced to face a simple but very difficult question. If wealth is not money, then what is it? It took me a long time to answer that question, not through theory, but through observation and experience. And then one day I realized something I should have understood much earlier. Wealth is not something you can hold. It is something you can control. Not the amount of money in your account, but your life. You can have a lot of money, but if you cannot control your time, then you are not wealthy. You can have a lot of assets, but if you cannot control your emotions, then you are not wealthy. You can achieve things that others admire, but if you cannot choose how you live each day, then you are still limited. And that is the first truth that very few people tell you. Wealth is the ability to control, not controlling others, not controlling circumstances, but controlling yourself, how you think, how you respond, how you use your time. Because if you cannot control those things, then anything you gain can also be taken away. You can earn money, but you can also lose it. You can achieve success, but you can also lose it. But if you have self-control, then you can always rebuild. And that is what truly has value. I've seen people who have very little money but are very clear. They know where they're going. They know what they want. They're not distracted by things that don't matter. And over time, they build the life they want. Not because they are lucky, but because they have a foundation. Meanwhile, I've also seen people with a lot of money, but without that foundation, they are pulled by opportunities, dragged by pressure, controlled by external things. And no matter how much they have, they still don't feel stable. And that's when I understood money does not create stability. It only amplifies the state you are already in. If you are grounded, money will make you more grounded. If you are not, money will make you lose control faster. And that's why there are people who, when they have more money, their lives don't get better. They become more complicated, more pressure, more problems, more things to maintain, because they never learned how to control themselves. And that is the second truth. Wealth is not having more. It is needing less to feel enough. This sounds simple, but if you think deeply, it completely changes how you see life. If you always need more, you will always be running. No stopping point, no sense of enough, no peace. But if you know what is enough, you are no longer forced to run. You can still move forward. You can still grow. But you are no longer driven by a sense of lack. And that is a very different state. A state where you are not pulled by external things. You choose. You decide. You live your way. And that is real freedom. Not being able to buy anything, but not needing to buy and still feeling enough. Not having endless options, but knowing which choices actually matter. And when you start to see that, a big shift happens. You no longer ask, how do I make more money? You start asking, how do I gain better control of my life? That is a completely different question. And that question will lead you to different answers. You begin to pay attention to your time. You begin to pay attention to your habits. You begin to notice the small choices that you used to ignore, because you understand that your life is not built from big things. It is built from small things repeated every day. And if you cannot control those small things, you will never control the big outcomes. And that's when you begin to see clearly, wealth is not something you chase externally. It is something you build from within. But there is something you need to face next. Understanding this does not automatically change your life. You can understand that wealth is control. You can understand that freedom is the real goal. But if you don't change how you live each day, everything will stay the same. And that's where many people stop. They understand, but they don't change. Because change is not easy. It requires you to do things differently, to let go of old habits, to face difficult choices. And that's why the next step is the most important one. Not understanding more, but rebuilding. Rebuilding how you live. Rebuilding how you choose. Rebuilding the person you are becoming. Once you've seen the truth, you cannot go back. You cannot continue living by a definition you know is wrong, but understanding has never been enough. I've seen many people, they understand very clearly. They understand that money is not everything. They understand that they need self-control. They understand that their life needs to change. But their life does not change. And the reason is very simple. Understanding does not create results. Repeated action creates results. And that is where most people stop. They stop at awareness, but never move into action, because action is uncomfortable. It requires you to do things you don't want to do. It requires you to say no when saying yes is easier. It requires patience when you want immediate results. And that's why you cannot just change your thinking. You have to rebuild how you live. Not with big decisions, but with small choices every day. I learned this the hard way. There was a period I knew I needed to change, but I kept my old habits. I kept reacting the same way. I kept choosing what was easy. I kept postponing what was important. And then I realized something. My life wasn't changing because I hadn't changed how I choose. Not in the big moments, but in the very small ones. You choose to wake up early or sleep more. You choose to learn or to be entertained. You choose to do the hard thing or delay one more time. Those choices seem unimportant, but they are shaping your life. And if you want to rebuild your life, you have to start there. Not with big goals, but with small behaviors. You don't need to change everything in one day. You only need to change a little. But that change must be repeated day after day. Not when you feel motivated, but especially when you don't. Because discipline is not a feeling. It is a choice. A choice repeated until it becomes your nature. And when you start living that way, something very interesting happens. You begin to regain control, not all at once, but piece by piece. You control your mornings, you control your time, you control what you allow into your life. And over time, those small pieces start connecting. They form a structure, a system, a way of living that is no longer dependent on circumstances. And that's when you begin to understand wealth is not something you have, it is something you operate. You operate your time, you operate your energy, you operate your attention, and when you can do that, results begin to change. Not because you are luckier, but because you are more stable. But there is something very important that you need to understand at this stage. Rebuilding is not just about adding, it is also about removing the things that don't serve you, the habits that pull you down, the choices that scatter your focus. I used to think that to move forward, I needed to do more. But the further I went, the more I realized the opposite. To move forward, you need to do less but better. You need to learn to say no. No to what doesn't matter. No to opportunities that don't align. No to things that only make you busy but don't move you forward. And that is not easy, because saying no means you accept missing out. You accept that you cannot have everything. But it is exactly when you let go of what doesn't matter that you make space for what truly does. And that's when your life starts to become clearer. Less noise, less distraction, less pressure, but deeper, more meaningful, and more directed. You begin to feel that you are building something, not just income, but a life where you are not carried by the current. You begin to create your own current, but there is one final step that you need to go through, and this step is no longer external action. It is a shift inside you, because you can build habits, you can create systems, you can change how you live. But if you still hold an old image of yourself, you will always return. You will limit yourself. You will stop when you begin to go further. You will go back to your comfort zone even when you know it's not right. And that's when you realize real change is not just doing things differently. It is becoming a different person, a person who can live by what you have built, a person who can stay steady when things change, a person who is no longer controlled by circumstances. And when you reach that point, a deeper transformation happens, not in action, but in identity, and that is where true wealth begins to form. Not from what you do, but from who you are. There is a moment when everything you've learned, done, and changed begins to come together, not in a loud way, not as a big turning point, but very quietly. You wake up one day and you realize you no longer think the same way. Things that once made you anxious no longer feel as heavy. Things that once pulled you in no longer have the same hold. And that is not because your circumstances have changed dramatically, but because you have changed. You no longer react the same way. You are no longer driven by temporary emotions. You no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. And that's when you begin to feel a very different kind of wealth. Not the feeling of having more, but the feeling of no longer lacking. You see, for a very long time, you lived with a familiar feeling that you were not enough, not good enough, not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not qualified enough. And that feeling kept you running faster, doing more, trying harder. But now, when you look back, you begin to realize something. Maybe you were never truly lacking, you just never felt like you had enough. And that is a huge difference. Because when you live in a state of lack, everything you have will never be enough. But when you enter a state of enough, everything you have starts to have meaning, not because it is more, but because the way you see it has changed. I used to think that one day when I achieved enough, I would feel at peace. But the further I went, the more I realized peace doesn't come when you have enough. It comes when you understand what enough is. And that is not a number. It is not a milestone. It is a decision that you no longer let your worth depend on what you have. You begin to measure your life not by assets, but by clarity, by freedom, by peace. And when you do that, everything starts to change. You stop chasing things that don't matter. You stop being pressured by external standards. You begin to live by your own standards, not lower standards, but truer ones. You still grow. You still set goals. You still build. But you no longer do it from a place of lack. You do it from a solid foundation, a foundation where you know who you are, And that is the most important thing, because in the end, your life is not determined by what you achieve. It is determined by who you become in the process. I've seen people who achieve a lot, but they don't like who they've become. They are stressed. They are exhausted. They lose connection with themselves. And all that success cannot compensate for that. Meanwhile, I've also seen others. They may not have everything, but they have peace. They have clarity. They have freedom in how they live. And if you ask me who is wealthier, my answer is very clear. Not the one who has more, but the one who feels enough. Because when you feel enough, you are no longer controlled. You are no longer forced to prove anything. You are no longer pulled by external things. You choose. You live. You create your life from a very different place. And that is true wealth. Not a destination, but a state. Not something you achieve at the end of the journey, but how you live throughout the journey. And when you understand this, something very interesting happens. You no longer ask, how do I become wealthy? You begin to ask, how do I need to live so that every day I am living like someone who is truly wealthy? And when that question appears, your life has already changed. Not because your circumstances are different, but because you are different. And from that point on, everything you build will be built on a very different foundation. No longer from lack, but from fullness. No longer from pressure, but from intention. No longer from chasing, but from choosing. And when you reach that point, you will look back at your entire journey and realize something you may not have expected at the beginning. Wealth was never outside. It has always begun from within you. And when you understand that, you don't just change how you make money, you change how you live. If you've come this far with me, you've probably started to see things differently. It's not that you've never heard about money. It's not that you've never thought about wealth. But for the first time, you are seeing it from the inside. You see that wealth is not something you chase. It is something you build. Not by how much money you have, but by how you live, by how you use your time, by the choices you make, and by who you are becoming every day. You can have a lot of money, but if you cannot control your life, you will still feel lacking. But when you begin to control yourself, you begin to feel enough even when you don't have everything. And that is the turning point, not when you earn more, but when you understand more clearly what truly matters, more clearly the life you want to build, and more clearly who you need to become to live that life. Because in the end, wealth is not a destination. It is how you walk the path. If this video made you pause for a moment and think a little differently, then that is already a big beginning. And if you want to continue this journey, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think needs to hear this. Because sometimes the right perspective can change an entire life. And now, I want to leave you with one question. Are you trying to become wealthy, or are you learning how to live like someone who is already wealthy from within? Leave your answer. And remember, success is not something you chase. It is something you attract by who you become. I truly appreciate you staying until the end of this video.